Now we're being joined by our correspondent, Giles Gibson, coming to us live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us on this broadcast. Giles, take us through today's events and ceremonies. We are currently waiting for President Biden, the 46th President of the United States, to arrive at the wreath-laying ceremony in Arlington Cemetery.
That's right, we're watching live pictures of Joe Biden, the new President of the United States, the 46th President of the United States, in Arlington National Cemetery, just over the border from the District of Columbia in Virginia. He is laying this wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier, and then he will be heading over to the White House shortly after this ceremony wraps up. Normally what we would see on an inauguration day is the new President of the United States parading through the streets of Washington with crowds of people and waving to them as he walks down to the streets. Of course, this time round, we're not going to see scenes like that because of the coronavirus pandemic and the security situation as well. There are really no crowds allowed inside sort of downtown Washington around the Capitol or around the White House. But we will get a brief glimpse of Joe Biden and the new First Lady Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden. They will get out of their car on Pennsylvania Avenue and take a short walk up to the gates of the White House. And then Joe Biden will walk into the Oval Office and have to get started with all of those pledges that he promised to do on day one.
And as you've mentioned, the heightened security measures in place, they're unprecedented on Inauguration Day, and celebrations obviously and traditions being quite muted. Also, not just because of the security concerns, but also in the face of this big global pandemic of coronavirus.
Yeah, so the heightened security is certainly a reaction to the events we saw exactly 2 weeks ago to the day when this crowd of Trump supporters stormed into the Capitol building and those extraordinary scenes that we saw broadcast all over the world. So the heightened security has been triggered by that. Up on Capitol Hill, I can tell you I've been reporting there over the course of the week. There is this large unscalable fence which has been put up right around the Capitol grounds, and also here in downtown Washington where I am, security is very tight indeed. You would normally see maybe up to 200,000 people crammed into the National Mall watching the proceedings on television, but this year round that is not happening, mostly due to the security concerns, but also because the Biden team didn't want to start their new administration as they try to get the coronavirus pandemic under control by encouraging a huge crowd of people to gather in the center of the US Capitol. So Joe Biden gave that inaugural address to 200,000 American flags which had been laid out on the National Mall to represent the Americans who couldn't come to their capital to watch these proceedings.
Right, stay with me, Giles. A quick roundup for our viewers who might just be tuning in. These images coming to you from the Arlington Cemetery. What a day it's been for America, and the last few hours have seen Joe Biden and Kamala Harris being sworn in at a subdued ceremony, but at the same time a historic one. These visuals from Arlington Cemetery signifying the sentiment that's running high across America. It's been an emotional swearing in, an emotional day altogether. The message that's coming from Joe Biden while he was being sworn in, and even in the run-up to the ceremony as he prepared to take over as the next president, has been about togetherness, has been about building America, and it's been about healing. And that, in a way, summarizes what America has hoped to achieve with the new administration coming in. We've been getting you the minute-by-minute updates of the Biden-Harris inauguration, which concluded just a while ago, and these images now coming to you from the Arlington Cemetery. Giles Gibson has been with us, getting us a better sense of what we are witnessing unfold on the ground. Giles, if we can speak about the very momentous occasion that this has been for America. It's not been an ordinary election. It's definitely not been an ordinary swearing in, especially given what we've seen on the 6th of January, the hope and the expectations that Americans have. If you can outline for us what this moment really means for the United States.
Well, I think what we're watching here live on television is the peaceful transition of power here in the United States, which has been under threat over the last few months, really since the election day itself back in November. And we saw Joe Biden make a reference to this in his speech. He said that violence sought to shake the Capitol's very foundations, referring, of course, to those people who stormed into the middle of Congress and interrupted the democratic process here in the United States. But I think also Donald Trump's attempts over the months after the US election to try and undermine public confidence in that vote, to sow doubt about the results, making these unfounded allegations about widespread voter fraud, which were never, ever proven in the courts, despite dozens of court cases brought by the Trump campaign. And then we saw Joe Biden taking this quite defiant tone in his inaugural address, talking about America's democracy, saying that it's precious, it's fragile, but that it has prevailed. And that's the sense that you get watching those events on the west front of the Capitol. You had Joe Biden there, of course, his new vice president, Kamala Harris, as well as former presidents, the Clintons, the Bushes, the Obamas, were all there to witness this transition of power. Vice President, or former Vice President Mike Pence, I should say, was a representative of the Trump administration, but there was a notably absent guest, and that was Donald Trump himself, who hours before had left the White House and left the US Capitol and flown down to his residence in Florida.
Right. Stay with me, Giles. A quick comment also from a former communication advisor to the Obama campaign, Spencer Critchley, joining us from Washington, D.C. This has been an election that also signifies the divisions within the United States. So the task ahead for the Joe Biden administration will be, as they have already outlined, to build togetherness and to ensure that these deep divisions are dealt with. How exactly do you think the Biden administration hopes to achieve that?
I think that Joe Biden told us that during his campaign when he talked repeatedly about restoring the soul of America. And I know many people assumed that was just the usual campaign rhetoric designed to fire up the voters. But I believe he actually meant that in his heart. And I think what he was referring to was this. Although the United States was founded as the world's civic nation, meaning there is no official religion in the United States and there is no ethnic identity to be an American. You must simply believe in the idea of America, the Constitution of America. That doesn't mean that morality doesn't play a part in it. In a sense, the soul of America is those democratic values that we all share and that we must share for democracy to survive. Commitment to equality, freedom, the rule of law, and democracy itself. And I believe that's the overriding priority here. America has lost its way during the past 4 years. Trump was trying to set up an autocracy, like a medieval monarchy where all power was embodied in one person. In the United States, power is in the people of the United States, all of them, not just one group of people, all of them. And so that's the soul that Joe Biden needs to appeal to, and that I think he was appealing to today in his speech.
Indeed. For those of you just joining us, these are the latest images coming in from the Arlington ceremony, the wreath-laying ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Biden joined by former U.S. presidents at this ceremony. Obama's, Clinton's, the Bush family join Biden at the Arlington ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier. The Biden-Harris inauguration has been an extraordinary one, also in terms of the challenges that lie ahead. This transition coming at a time when there have been threats of unrest, indications of violence that the law enforcement agencies have been dealing with. the looming threat of instability after what we witnessed on the 6th of January at the US Capitol, the siege at the seat of American democracy, was the point at which the tumultuous period, in a way, reached its tipping point. It's been a tumultuous 4 years, an election, a transition, which has been unlike any other in the past, given the issues and the challenges and the circumstances under which this transition is taking place. US President Joe Biden at the Arlington Cemetery. A strong message that also came in during his speech that he delivered while he was being sworn in, and that in a way has been the overarching message throughout the transition period that's coming from the Biden administration. And that has been of togetherness. That has been that it is the time to heal. Joe Biden has called this a new day for America, and quite rightly so, given the expectations that have been running high. Giles Gibson is with us and has been getting us a better sense of what this means for the United States, the Biden-Harris transition, the inauguration that has taken place, and the expectations that Americans have at this point. Giles, like we've been talking about the unprecedented transition that's taken place, it's not been a smooth one by any measure. The challenges that lie ahead for the Joe Biden administration are plenty. But in terms of dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, the priorities have been laid out. The implementation is something that will be very closely watched, especially because the Biden administration has given out all intent of the way in which it plans to deal with the pandemic head-on.
Well, I just want to pick up on that point that you were making about how Joe Biden has issued this call for unity, and that message for unity really dominated a lot of his speech. He called on every American to join him in the cause of uniting the country, and he said we must end this uncivil war. But there's really no getting away from it that Joe Biden's presidency, whether he likes it or not, is going to begin on a bipartisan note, because of course Donald Trump just in the last few weeks has been impeached for the second time by the House of Representatives. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, is going to be sending an article of impeachment up to the US Senate, we believe, by the end of the week, and then we'll begin the very first few days of Joe Biden's presidency with an impeachment trial in the Senate. And so what we're going to see is Joe Biden trying to get to grips with the coronavirus pandemic, trying to get some of his top officials confirmed by the US Senate as that impeachment trial is playing out at the same time. And that is going to be just a challenge that we've never really seen an administration dealing with before. Sort of on the one hand, an impeachment trial about the former president, and the new president trying to get their new pieces of legislation through the Senate as well.
For the wreath-laying ceremony, for those of you just joining us, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is where these images are coming to you from at the National Arlington Ceremony. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is a monument that stands in the cemetery honoring the deceased members of the American military whose remains were never identified. It is one of many such monuments around the world. After the First World War, there was a movement to commemorate the lives of unidentified soldiers with a single tomb containing the remains of one of the fallen. US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris participated in the wreath-laying ceremony after the inauguration ceremony to pay respect to the military and those who have lost their lives fighting in wars. This tradition is carried out at every inauguration. The monument at Arlington National Cemetery was created on the 11th of November 1921. And a marble superstructure was placed on top of it 10 years later. It's an emotional moment for America. after a lot of uncertainty post the election. It's not been a smooth transition by any measure. Even as the inauguration took place, law enforcement agencies left nothing to chance and were dealing with looming threats of unrest and violence. This after the 6th January U.S. Capitol siege, the attack on the seat of American democracy at the U.S. Capitol Hill, and the violence that was witnessed, the threats of violence and unrest had forced the law enforcement agencies to have 25,000 National Guard troops come into Washington for the inauguration ceremony that concluded just a while ago, with U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris now officially sworn in. A lot that remains to be discussed. With us have been our panelists. Let me first get in our correspondent Giles Gibson, who's been with us from Washington, D.C. Giles, the very first day in office for Joe Biden is going to be a very eventful one. Take us through what we expect over the next few hours.
Well, right through the presidential campaign, pretty much whichever issue was raised, whether it was the coronavirus pandemic or the economy or uniting America, you would hear Joe Biden say, I'm going to do this on day one. And of course, now we are on day one of the Biden presidency, not the first full day, but certainly the first day. And he's got a challenge to deliver on all of those pledges that he made over the course of the campaign. We are expecting the new president, the 46th president of the United States, to sign 17 different executive orders when he gets to the White House itself. That's going to be covering a whole range of different issues, but a lot of these orders are going to be basically undoing things that were done during the Trump presidency. He's going to be signing an executive order that will start the process of the United States rejoining the Paris Climate Change Agreement. He's also going to stop the process of the United States withdrawing from the World Health Organization. He's going to be cancelling this major pipeline project, the Keystone XL pipeline. He's also going to be ending restrictions on travel from Muslim-majority countries that was brought in by the Trump administration. That was known as the Muslim ban when it was brought in. So what we are seeing is Joe Biden really with the stroke of a pen just ending all sorts of executive orders that were issued by his predecessor, Donald Trump, who is, of course, down in Florida. But then the other work that he's going to try and do, things like getting that $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package passed, that's going to take a lot more than just signing an executive order. He's got to get that money approved and that legislation through the House of Representatives and through a very tight Senate as well, even though it is just controlled by the Democrats.
Right. Stay with me, Giles. Also getting in perspectives from former communication advisor to the Obama campaign, Spencer Critchley, who's been with us from Washington, D.C. If you look at the various promises and the pledges that the Biden administration has made, the orders that Giles was also telling us about that are going to be kicking off the new administration's first day, including rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, ending Trump's Muslim travel ban. All of these have been lined up as the expected legislations that will come our way, and we will, of course, keep monitoring those developments. But a lot of the transition now will be about undoing the work done by the Trump presidency. When it comes to China, specifically, there will be additional pressure on the Biden administration. How exactly do you think Joe Biden will be able to balance that relationship?
I think that China will be an example of his approach to foreign policy generally. Foreign policy, international relations, ultimately comes down to a contest of interests, as Hans Morgenthau describes so brilliantly in his classic Politics Among Nations. We'd like to think that it's, moral missions and people are only serving right and wrong. And certainly in the United States, we expect morality to underpin everything that happens in foreign or domestic policy, although we've seriously lost our way in that regard in recent years. But ultimately, it's a balance of interests because it's human beings we're dealing with here. What will make the transformative difference, I believe, with Joe Biden is he will be firm with China and he will defend U.S. interests where those interests are in danger, but he will not be irrational and impulsive and engage in bigotry-driven attacks against the Chinese. And I think that will be a huge improvement, not just for our allies, but for our competitors around the world to be able to return to a scene of international relations that's based on basic rationality.
Right, and touching upon the point that you've made about the rhetoric and the bigotry, the common thread running through Joe Biden's messages all throughout has been the need for togetherness and how it's a time to heal. Explain to us why it's so important for the Biden administration to live up to that promise specifically, because there is a lot of hope and Americans have these expectations of how Joe Biden will be able to mend those divisions and bring America together.
Right, and I think that it's important for people to realize, as I believe that Joe Biden certainly does, that this is not just a kind of gauzy, sentimental appeal to unity like you might see on a greeting card. This is actually fundamental to the way democracy works, and the unity that he's describing is the most significant form of unity in the United States. It's unity in commitment to the fundamental principles of democracy. And as I describe in my book, that's what has ended up dividing us into these two nations. People have lost track of that as the basis of unity. And America has been devolving from a civic nation united by those ideas into an ethnic nation where you have ethnic groups divided by race and culture who are competing over interests. And this is a very serious devolution and degradation of the founding vision of America. And that's really what Biden, I think, is talking about. Unity in that sense, unity on those shared values. We will never be united by a shared religion or a shared moral philosophy, really beyond that shared commitment to those core values of democracy. But, you know, to make a reference to the Judeo-Christian tradition, these are essentially the commandments of democracy, is that commitment to equality, freedom, the rule of law, those sorts of values. And that's really what will reunite us, is to remind the American people that is where our unity comes from.
Degradation of the core values, when you say that, that also, of course, refers to the manner in which this inauguration was carried out in the looming threat of violence and unrest and unprecedented security measures.
Yes, we saw really the crisis of that long-term trend that I think really began, unfortunately, shortly after the founding, but has been greatly accelerated since World War II. With the attack on the Capitol, which was previously unimaginable in the modern United States, we saw what had been a cold civil war turn into, thank God, still small scale, but still a hot civil war involving actual violence and actual death. As I say, previously unthinkable, you know, really since the Civil War. This underscores the seriousness of the challenge facing us. This is not going to be solved by any particular policy, any one executive order or piece of legislation, as important as any of those might be. We must reunite by addressing this very serious crisis that actually threatens the future of our democracy.